Our Hebrew reading this morning comes from the book of Exodus, chapter 34, verses 29 through 35. Moses came down from Mount Sinai. As he came down from the mountain with the 2 tablets of the covenant in his hand, Moses did not know that the skin of his face shone because he had been talking with God. When Aaron and all the Israelites saw Moses, the skin of his face was shining, and they were afraid to come near him. But Moses called to them, and Aaron and all the leaders of the congregation returned to him, and Moses spoke to them. Afterward, all the Israelites came near, and he gave them in commandment all that the Lord had spoken with him on Mount Sinai. When Moses had finished speaking with them, he put a veil on his face. But whenever Moses went in before the Lord to speak with him, he would take the veil off until he came out. And when he came out and told the Israelites what he had been commanded, the Israelites would see the face of Moses, that the skin of his face was shining, and Moses would put the veil on his face again until he went in to speak with him. Our gospel reading comes from the Gospel of Luke, chapter 9, verses 28 through 36. Now, about 8 days after these sayings, Jesus took with him Peter and John and James and went up on the mountain to pray. And while he was praying, the appearance of his face changed, and his clothes became dazzling white. Suddenly, they saw 2 men, Moses and Elijah, talking to him. They appeared in glory and were speaking of his departure, which he was about to accomplish at Jerusalem. Now, Peter and his companions were weighed down with sleep, but since they had stayed awake, they saw his glory and the 2 men who stood with him. Just as they were leaving him, Peter said to Jesus, "Master, it is good for us to be here. Let us make 3 dwellings, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah," not knowing what he said. And while he was saying this, a cloud came and overshadowed them, and they were terrified as they entered the cloud. Then from the cloud came a voice that said, "This is my son, my chosen. Listen to him." And when the voice had spoken, Jesus was found alone. And they kept silent, and in those days told no one any of the things they had seen. Three disciples, still learning, were probably wondering what they said yes to when Jesus invited them to come follow. Because this day, Jesus invited these 3 to go up the mountain with him. They didn't know why they were asked, why they were the only ones asked, or even why they were going up the mountain. They've been on the road, walking for miles a day, stopping, watching, and listening to Jesus teach and heal. They clearly were tired. After climbing the mountain, trying to stay awake, they maybe even wondered why Jesus brought them all the way up the mountain, whether they'd get some sleep and maybe even something to eat. How would you or I feel if we were walking in their shoes this day? What if Jesus said to you, "You 3, come to the mountain with me. The rest of you stay right here and wait"? What would we be thinking, feeling? How would we respond? Who's ready to climb a mountain after a long day's journey, watching and listening to Jesus' teaching, and maybe not even eating anything yet this day? Oh, and you know what? We're supposed to drink a lot of water, right? But did they carry water on this journey up the mountain? Did they have water to drink along any of their journeys? They didn't have the types of things that we have to carry water on a hike. Maybe they might even be asking questions like, what is this all about? Who are we following? Oh, we know his name. And we know people call him a prophet. What are we following? What leader is this? Believe it or not, it's still early in Jesus' ministry, and yet it's later than you think. Remember, Jesus' ministry lasted only about 3 years, yet the disciples are still learning, though not always understanding what Jesus is telling them, what he's leading them to, and what they are to do besides walk along with him, listen, and watch. Now, they're present when Jesus experiences transfiguration while praying. They see it all, yet know not what they are seeing as it happens so fast. And then in the flash of that moment, coming out of the blinding light, there's Moses and Elijah. Sorry about that. There's Moses and Elijah in a big boom from heaven, standing and talking with Jesus. The three see with their eyes, but can't hear what's being said. All they know is two really important leaders from the past who've been dead a long time suddenly appeared following Jesus' time in prayer. Up on the mountain, the three are away from Jesus. They might have been talking together, or maybe trying to stay awake, or maybe to make good impression on Jesus to stay awake. Or they might have been each fighting the closed eye syndrome. You know, much like some of us get. My mother used to say she just had her eyes closed, but she was listening. Oh, once in a while, that was true. Jesus, well, I'm sure he slept sometimes, but there's nothing in our Gospels about Jesus ever sleeping. He too must have been tired, but he knew God was moving him forward, teaching him more about the journey he was on and heading toward. While praying, suddenly out of nowhere, Jesus' face lit up. I mean, bright, white, purified like. And one of the disciples caught it out of the corner of their eye and notified the others quickly. What is this sudden change of appearance? It's called transfiguration, which is a form of exaltation or glorification or a spiritual change. So putting it simply, Jesus was in the midst of a deeper spiritual change in this journey at the mountaintop. And if we look at scriptures, Jesus' ministry too was about to make some changes, including the Lenten journey, as we might call it today, which is the journey Jesus is about to take in his journey to Jerusalem, leading to Golgotha and the cross. So many thoughts, questions, and things to figure out. Jesus doesn't tell them anything about his transfiguration or the sudden appearance of Moses and Elijah right there with him, talking with him. Prophets of old, standing right there in front of them. What were they doing there with Jesus? What were they talking about? What's going on? There's some indication and or belief Moses, who was the giver of law, and Elijah, who represented the prophets, were there telling Jesus more about what is to come on his own Lenten journey. The betrayal, the walk to the cross, and the resurrection. They were there to help prepare Jesus and maybe even remind Jesus God would continue to walk the journey with him. Wow. Would an experience like this have been as exciting and moving for you and I as it seems to have been for Peter, James, and John? To see Jesus' transfiguration and then immediately see Moses and Elijah with Jesus. We too grew up hearing about both these prophets, but for us, they've been dead even longer, a whole long way back. And so goes the story on the mountain. But wait a minute. There's more to their experience, especially how Peter begins to understand it. By now, we all know Peter and his reputation when it comes to experiencing new things while with Jesus. We probably all at one time or another said something embarrassing or which really didn't fit the moment. Maybe said something which later in hindsight we might have wished we never said. Kind of like the old saying, open my mouth and put my foot in it. I used to say, I'm just changing feet for a different flavor. But I wonder if this is how Peter felt again after telling Jesus, let's build 3 dwellings. One for Moses, one for Elijah, and one for Jesus. But Peter didn't know what he was saying, the significance of the moment he experienced and what they needed to do going forward. Peter wanted to keep it all on the mountaintop, nice, neat, compact, right there. It seems like Peter would have been content to stay there too. Yet, Luke's gospel of the Transfiguration invites you and I to use our senses, the senses of seeing and sight, to come to know more about Jesus, to dwell with the experience as witnessed by Peter, James, and John, and to experience more of who Jesus is. First of all, this prophet Jesus, as he was known and called by many of the time, is about praying and prayer. Think about all the times Jesus pulled away from the crowds or the disciples and went off and prayed. Even before the crowds and disciples, Jesus spent 40 days in the wilderness in prayer while being tempted by the devil. Prayer was the way Jesus talked with God, his creator, his best friend. And it was in prayer that Jesus' transfiguration, his radiance shined forth. The thought of prayer leaves us with many questions to think about. We know some of what Jesus' prayer times were like. We know he frequently went off and prayed. And we know a couple times he had an extraordinary experience, like our text talks about today. The Transfiguration experience followed by a voice coming from the cloud saying, "This is my son, my chosen, listen to him." Jesus was chosen to lead the way for all. Have you ever had an extraordinary prayer experience of some sort? If you haven't, don't feel bad. Don't feel left out, because I don't really know anyone who has, though there are some we might have heard about who experience something different. What is prayer? When you pray, what do you expect to come out of your prayer time? Or more simply put, what do you expect when you pray? Is prayer a time where you bring all your concerns for others and maybe even yourself to God? And what do you do with those then? Do you bring them there and leave them with God? Or do you share them with God and then take them all back along with you to fret over in between your prayer times? What's your experience when you pray? Is anything revealed to you in your prayer time? Do you experience any change when you pray? Do you feel different than you did before you stopped to pray? Who do you talk to or with when you pray? God, Jesus, your best friend, yourself. I know for some, prayer is just awkward when left to do it ourselves. I know that there's times, sometimes lots of times, when only a few words come from within. And there's times where no words come. Our minds wander to our grocery list or our schedule for the day. It's okay. It's no different than the times you are with your best friend. And sometimes the words just don't come, so you sit in silence together. Or you remember your to-do list. Today, I hope you know it's okay to sit in silence. Though you don't seem to be saying anything, God hears what's rattling in your heart, in your mind. And it might not even sound understandable, more like gibberish. It's all right, for God knows what we say even before we say it. And I hope today that we all know transfiguration for us won't look like it did for Jesus. Transfiguration for us might be a feeling of relief, or a feeling of being loved or held and supported, taking the weight off of our inner longing. Might be a feeling of joy after talking with our best friend, or a feeling of new life, having left the weight of the world with our best friend. I believe in the power of prayer. And for the times most all of us struggle in some way with praying, I pray that you feel God's presence as you sit with your best friend, showing up and talking with words or silence. God invites us to sit and be with God each day, to talk with our best friend, to enjoy God's presence and know we won't be judged or criticized because someone, maybe our own small, still voice within, says we did it wrong, we prayed wrong. It can't be wrong if we're sitting with our best friend, sharing words and or sounds of silence. Life, your life will be transformed and transfigured in ways unknown if you pray with your best friend each day. And whenever you want to be together with your best friend, it's the relationship of a lifetime. So, in the darkness of the night, of the purifying radiance of the sun, let us pray to our best friend, God. And today, let us remember, God waits for us to show up so we can be together with God.